Welcome to the smart community. Smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
I'm back with another bonus episode of the Smart Community Podcast that brings together multiple guests' answers to the question, where to next for smart cities and communities? As the focus this month was the future of work, this time I'm sharing with you the answers of our guests this month. So we have episode 133, Sally Illingworth, episode 134, Thea O'Connor, episode 135, Anuraj Gambhir, episode 136 was Andrew Grill, but we had such an interesting and long conversation. I forgot to ask him this question specifically, but you can go back and his whole episode was basically where to next. So his episode was 136. And then we have episode 137, Colin Kinner. So you hear from Sally, Thea, Anuraj, and Colin in this episode. So there are a couple of main themes in this episode. You'll hear these guests talk a lot about the various stakeholders and the humans at the center of work and the way technology is changing that. So how do we strike that balance between the technology and the automation side of things with the people, the jobs, and more importantly, and most importantly, the human brains and bodies and how they actually function best? Creativity and critical thinking is a key theme, as is the importance of keeping the focus on communities, on investing in the people, and investing in collaboration opportunities within workplaces, within cities, within communities. The future of work is a really broad topic, and each of these guests are focusing on a different part of it. But it's a really fascinating conversation, so I hope you enjoy it. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. Where to next in this space? You know, when you look into this future to work conversation, where do you think we're going to step next?
That's a really interesting question. It comes down to change management and transitioning and transformation. And on the employee and employer side, on both ends, I suppose, of the market, is a lot of people just are struggling. And that's not to say, when I say a lot of people, I'm not excluding myself from that scenario. A lot of us, like you just said, no one knows. Everyone's still trying to figure out, how do we manage this change in expectations, this change in, I suppose, the evolution of an employee? How do we manage the change in, I suppose, the fact that we're all really competing at a global scale, whether it's to attract talent or retain talent? And so I think, a lot of it comes down to change management and how do we really manage that? And not just from an employee and employer perspective, but even in the middle of the marketplace. You know, I know a lot of people who work in the recruitment space. So, you know, they're out there to manage talent, if you like, to go and find the talent and connect them to companies. And, you know, if you look at the data, even recruitment companies are struggling to do what they've traditionally done and have good retention levels and place people. Because I think the world is moving so quickly, things are changing so quickly. And a lot of it comes down to expectations, preferences, aspirations, and so forth, which all really comes back to emotion. So, you know, we've got this massive challenge as to, well, how do we manage change and this sort of change with the workforce when it's all been emotionally driven? And I don't think any single person's got the answer yet. So but in terms of where it's all going and stuff like that, I think, and it sort of ties back to the conversation around smart cities to an extent as well, is, like people, I think, you know, getting the right people together in multiple different silos, like it's not one group, for example, that's going to solve it, but it all comes down to thinking creatively at the end of the day and, you know, looking at what's actually happening in the economic landscape, what's actually happening for companies, and really trying to develop solutions that can facilitate managing that change for businesses and employees and so forth. I mean, it's such a broad conversation, you know, it's such a deep conversation. And to use the word, like you said, like no one knows, like it's such an unknown conversation. So in terms of what's next, I think there's going to continuously be a growing demand for people who can think really critically to help address these issues for everyone that's involved in those marketplaces, which is your employees, your employers, you know, your recruiters, your management consultants who go in and audit companies and help them to restructure, I've been privy to companies that have restructured multiple times. And due to all of these changes, in the workforce, these restructuring companies who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, they're not seeing the same results anymore when they go in to do restructures, because they haven't evolved their thinking and so forth to, I suppose, cater to that of the modern employee or the modern dynamics of the workforce. So there's a lot of change that's happening. And so I think the best thing we can probably do as, business owners or entrepreneurs or thinkers is to really think critically and try and let go of a lot of the legacy thinking to come up with new ways that are relevant to deal with these challenges that we're all being faced by. So that's my long answer.
No, I love that. And I was just thinking while you were talking about we're going from templates to tailored, right?
Yeah, I love that. Templates to tailor. I really like that.
Thank you. I just came up with it myself.
It's really cool.
Let's trademark it.
Yeah.
Another one. Heard here first. Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing that. And I also think what you were talking about there, you've got your employees and your employers, but we do remember that we've got all these other people involved in the conversation and in, the world. But I was also thinking that, as you were saying, that the companies that are trying to attract and retain this talent also are trying to work out what the hell they're doing as well. You know what I mean? So we're all in this world of like uncertainty and unknowing, and then trying to make sure we've got the right people, but then actually working out, well, what is it that we actually want to do, which obviously all meshes together because you need those people that are going to be curious and creative and critical and think critically as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's an exciting challenge,
Yeah, I agree.
And, I think how it'll, on the topic of smart communities, right? Like smart communities, well, at least in my opinion, is sort of the integration between and the collaboration between humans and technology. And I think the same applies, just generally speaking with the future of the workforce is a lot of people are fearful of technology. But, I think if we can approach it in the right way, where we really take ownership of that from an implementation perspective, and, as businesses, as leaders and so forth, is that we really get involved in the process in which we identify and determine how technology is going to be used. For example, where is technology going to be used to automate something? Where is it going to be used to augment something? Where is it going to be used to make a human completely redundant? And I think that's the really important discussion that we need to be having, and business owners and leaders and entrepreneurs at every single level of, I suppose, societal hierarchy or corporate hierarchy need to be a part of that conversation. Because I think with the fear, a lot of people go, oh, let's just see what happens, and that works to the detriment of everyone. And to put it in a business perspective, it's working to the detriment of profitability for a lot of companies and so forth, because they're not willing to embrace that uncertainty and be a part of the conversation. So I think as soon as people are willing to, have the courage to be a part of that conversation, and that honest conversation is where they'll really be able to remain competitive and actually build businesses and jobs and companies and careers that I suppose can adapt to become future-proof.
That's so perfect. I totally agree. And it's a reason why I started the podcast, so that everyone can get involved in this conversation, because we need to be. And it's not about the big tech companies. It's not about just government or high officials or whatever. It's actually about all of us, and we really need to get involved, because we need to shape what technology we want to bring into our lives and what stuff we don't need right now. And that really depends on, the community and the way you want to live and all those type of things, and the life that you want, building your own life, your own smart life, and how you want to do that. So
yeah, I think if I can just add one thing with what you've just said there, and I think that speaks volume, and I love what you're doing with this podcast, because I think it's, for a lot of people, like smart community, smart city, it's like, it sounds like such a foreign conversation. So I really love that you're bringing everyone together to be a part of that conversation, to try and get people to just really think about it and how they want to contribute to that conversation and really shape the future. And it reminds me of a quote, I just can't remember it word for word, that Steve Jobs once said, and I think through your podcast you're really harnessing this, is, he said something to the effect of, anyone who's ever done or built anything great was no smarter than you. They just simply had the willingness and the ability to commit to being a part of the process and thinking. And, I think through your podcast, you're probably really harnessing that idea by making it a collaborative conversation. And I think there's a lot of power in that. So I love that you're doing that.
So where to next in this space?
Where to next? I think there's going to be an ongoing tension for quite a very long time between getting immersed in our computers and our health really suffering. But I don't think it's going to be solved very quickly. But the one thing we do know about humans is that when the pain gets too bad, then we will see a shift. And we are seeing increasing rates of exhaustion, amongst workers. About a third aren't just tired. A third of Australian full-time workers are extremely tired or completely exhausted just about all the time. A quarter of people experience anxiety. So all the stats are going up. I just want to know, how bad does it have to get before we start to live in more body intelligent ways? And unfortunately for some people, it's going to be really bad. It is going to be the crisis. So I think what next, we're going to see a battle, a battle in trying to maintain our health in the current way that we live and work. And I honestly don't know when the tipping point might be.
Yeah, it will be really interesting, as we kind of change, and whether it's going to be, a forced change based on demands from, I guess, I don't want to say millennials coming through, because it's not just millennials. People think millennials are doing all these things, which is great because they are, but also, other people of all ages in the workforce are demanding more from their environments, I suppose, both work, at home, the community, those type of things, which is, I guess, what technology is supposed to help us with, so we can buy back that leisure time. But if we're just using that time then to be more and more and more and more and more and more and more productive, our bodies can't keep up with us.
Exactly. And that's where, leadership is just going to be so critical, because, in the current workplace with resource cuts and job insecurity in the background, workers are going to keep overriding their bodies to save their jobs. So it's going to a lot of responsibility on leaders to communicate, what's okay to do at work, give permission, and not just give permission, but reward people. Good on you for taking your lunch. You're going to be so much better this afternoon. Fantastic that you left work on time. I love it how you don't send any late emails at night time. Leaders are going to be critical so that people actually feel permission to practice self-care on the job. And so many people don't feel permission at the moment. So, emerging workplace leaders are going to play a really important role so that they can create different cultures, which we are seeing. But often it's in the smaller organisations that have been founded by someone who got burnt out in a big corporate and hated it and thought, right, I'm going to create something different. So they just need more of them. And the more that they can demonstrate business benefit, of course, I think the more proof other businesses will have to follow.
That's a perfect place to wrap it up, I think, because I think you're so right. I'm hoping we move from this, bums in seats, prerogative of, you were here 8 hours and you need to be here for this long and blah, 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 whatever it is, keep going, to, these outcomes and the creativity. It's not based on, it's not hours worked equals amount of creativity. It will be those things that fuel your body. Sleep. Have I had a break? Have I been able to eat properly, et cetera, which will then equal those higher order creativity or productivity in the sense of outcomes, rather than just, I worked this amount of hours, therefore I work this hard.
Absolutely. And I really think, just to finish, one of the best things that people can do and start practicing now is to practice listening to the small talk of your body, those little early niggles, the little signs and symptoms, because the better you get at responding to them promptly, then it will only take the 5 or 10 minute break to restore your energy and attention. The more you ignore them, it'll take a crisis to stop you, and then you have to turn your whole life upside down. So one of the best things you can do to set yourself up for a sustainable career into the future is to listen to the small talk of your body.
So where to next for smart cities and communities?
Where to next? Oh, I think it's evolving so fast, that whole space. And like I was saying, I think it's really the way I refer to it, because I've been looking at this kind of more spiritual angle and saying, okay, it's Mother Earth, it's the Gaia philosophy, and it's about how do we connect back to nature? Because that's where I think that harmonization needs to be even stronger. So I would say one of the interesting trials and projects that has been happening that I've been following closely is by the Alphabet company, by Google's company called Sidewalk Labs. And they've got this big precinct they've got in Toronto, and they're going to replicate that in other parts. They've actually been using a lot more learnings from nature also. So they're using wood and authentic, sort of materials from nature to recreate aspects of this whole community that they're building up in the waterfront area within Toronto. And that's obviously that urban environment, but they're looking at many different touch points, and actually they're focusing totally on the human touch points. So looking at every aspect of a pedestrian access, looking at providing access for energy optimization. So with that regard, I'm saying they've even worked with the big manufacturers like Samsung and LG and so forth to come up with direct current sort of access into the, say, a smart home within that precinct, or be it for the office use, because that's where power over Ethernet, for example. So because alternate current, AC is not really optimal. We can have all the appliances really do a down conversion from AC to DC. So what they're talking about is a direct access. So it's kind of a greenfield and redesigning it from scratch with DC. So you're able to have, say, 48 volt DC appliance, which is so much more optimized, so much more efficient. All these different new areas which we had to work with legacy systems, they're sort of overcoming all those barriers. And especially, like I said, for me, the learnings are also very much around how do we get back closer to nature and harmonize that, and talk of the smart city being and the communities being part of a bigger living organism, which is continually evolving. And it's all about, that butterfly effect, as we talk about as an analogy, right? That, aspect here could create a big impact there. So it's about taking everything into account. You need to find a win-win-win for every stakeholder in that ecosystem.
It's interesting. So I visited Sidewalk Labs when I was in Toronto.
Oh, right. Okay. And what did you think?
Well, I mean, it has some really amazing features, the ones that you were talking about, power over Ethernet and the timber and the accessibility and all that type of stuff. But it was really interesting, the social license to operate issue that they have, or the lack of, and how they're going to overcome that. Lots of people asking questions about, data and privacy and, those types of things, which, are huge issues. But because it's a completely different way of doing things, whether Toronto is ready for that type or in the form that they want to do it. But yeah, it's really fascinating, because I think there's a potential that those benefits that are there may not be enough to get over the line. So yeah, I found it really fascinating and really difficult, because it's really polarizing in the community there. Like if you mention it, like it's in the news every day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a great model to aspire towards. And I think that's where, because I did meet the head of the Sidewalk Lab who'd come down to University of Wollongong, and we caught up with him, and just the whole vision and everything is quite inspiring also. But you're right. I mean, the real issues of governance and the data privacy and all that, which obviously need to be overcome. But I think it's about the different steps that they're taking and sort of paving the path to some ideal scenarios, which we should all look up to, And I think there are good examples of smart cities from around the world. Obviously, Singapore, Barcelona, as I said, has some touch points from the telecom space that we've been looking at. But London, each of those bigger mature cities. But then I look at Scandinavia, they've done some really interesting things there also, like Copenhagen and Stockholm and so forth. And there are touch points from all over the world, and even like Korea and China obviously have many different. And I'm currently been doing some work on the future human-centric smart city design approach for the precinct in Hong Kong, China, Macau sort of area in Shenzhen, and which is kind of a big innovation precinct, and trying to look at what are the touch points there that we can uplift and bring learnings from rest of the world from. So I think it's really about cross-pollinating across what's happening around the world and looking at those best-in-class examples, but then creating what's important and adapting what's needed for your local ecosystem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's like you were talking about before, about returning to Mother Nature, I suppose, and then what is it that we want for our communities? And some communities will want that newly developed, that type of thing. That's what will be required. But then others will be kind of a retrofit or a nothing. It might just be higher connectivity, so then people can access the internet or something like that. And what are those things that we need? And the mobility and having seamless kind of experience in a place, but without losing that, really local culture, I suppose, of a place.
Yeah, exactly.
So where to next for the startup community?
Yeah, if I knew that, I'd be very happy. Look, I think there's a bunch of things that we need to be doing across Australia in terms of growing our startup communities. At a really basic level, I think first thing that we need to be doing is making a commitment that says we want to build startup communities. Seems kind of obvious, but I think, like I was saying before, I think there are some regions and some cities that have said it's really important for us to build a vibrant startup community because these are the kinds of companies we want to see more of. But I think most regions haven't had that realization. And I think that's kind of step one for me, I think, is for regions and cities to say, you know what, we have a view about what kinds of companies we want to see started and growing here, wherever we are. And, if the businesses that they're supporting to start and grow are hairdressers and coffee shops, then if you fast forward a decade or two, I think that's a region that's going to be in a pretty tough place economically. Whereas I think, the regions that say, well, we're really interested in supporting high growth companies that can tackle a market that's much beyond our local area, I think they're the ones that'll be in a much better place.
I think there's a diversity that's needed in the space, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts on when we're building a startup community, what does that actually look like and mean? We talked about co-working spaces before, which is kind of people's go-to, like innovation hub or a co-working space or whatever we want to call it, precinct. What are some of the other, mechanisms that we need to build a startup community?
Yeah, so events are really important. There's a really good book by Brad Feld called Building Startup Communities, and it's on exactly this topic. It focuses a lot on Boulder, Colorado, which is where he's been instrumental in building a really successful startup community, but the principles apply anywhere. And one of the core principles is that you need to have a regular cadence of events that anyone can just show up to. And so if you're building a startup community and you say, well, there's going to be this event in January, and then we'll put on another event in August, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll do a Christmas lunch, and then a few random sporadic things in between. That doesn't allow people to engage by saying, hey, I just want to be involved and show up and learn stuff. So I think that's one really simple thing that helps a lot, is to say there's a pitch night every Friday, and there's a lunch and learn every Tuesday, and there's this other kind of event every second Wednesday or whatever it might be, so that people just get in the habit of going, all right, that's where things happen.
And that's a good use of the space, I think, in co-working spaces, because obviously you work in Canvas co-working in Toowoomba and other places like that have these events where it's kind of creating this community of people not necessarily co-working there, but they're members, so that they can come to these events and they know that this is on and the lunch and learn is on Fridays or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think, looking at that Canvas co-working as an example, I think Joy and David have absolutely done that. And they're probably unusual in terms of their peer group in regional startup hubs, in that they've really set about understanding how to build a really good startup community. And they're doing exactly that. The biggest challenge I see, not just for them, but for a lot of other regional startup community builders, is that they're not resourced well. I think, back to my point about regions and cities making a commitment that says this is what we want, the next part of that has to be, well, we're going to put some money behind it. It's all very well to say we want to have a city that's building lots of successful technology companies and have a vibrant ecosystem and all of that, but who's going to fund it? So this can't be run on, at least not solely on volunteers.
And not for profits, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, there is an important message there for cities to say, well, look, if we want to have these kinds of companies, we need to invest in building the soft infrastructure that supports them.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, like you said, if you just bring it back to an economic development perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And for councils and state governments and others to invest in, and not to say that, there hasn't been some investment, but we do really need to ramp it up if we want to nurture these spaces, so then we can, really drive I don't want to say innovation because it sounds cliche, but, not just the innovation, but then the maintaining. The innovation might be there. You might have a great idea and that type of thing, but real innovation is actually in maintaining that idea and product and building the business behind it so it can be sustainable.
Yeah, totally. And I think, it's hard for cities and people involved in economic development to get a vision for what kinds of companies they might end up with. If they go to your typical regional startup hub, what they're going to see is a bunch of small ragtag teams working on things that nobody really knows whether they're going to come to anything. So it is a difficult one. And this is where I think, if we can get people from particularly regional centers in Australia to go and experience other ecosystems, like Boulder, Colorado would be a classic one. Say, well, here's a region that's got a population of 100,000 people, but they actually have more successful tech startups than pretty much anywhere on the planet for a region of that size. In fact, I read that Boulder now has more startups per capita than Silicon Valley.
Wow, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed having these conversations, and I've really enjoyed this month about the future of work. We really hope that you have as well. If there is another theme that you think we should cover, please let us know, hello@mysmart.community. Or if you've really enjoyed this one, please go ahead and leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you so much. Talk soon. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter @SmartComPod. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.